Recent amendments to the Central Civil Service rules means that any retired government officer who worked for an organization connected to security or intelligence cannot now write a book, a newspaper article, or give a television interview. Will you continue to write and therefore ignore this rule because it's in the greater national interest and it doesn't threaten revealing secrets? Or will you now silence yourself? Or will you seek permission first? Which of the three?
I'm not going to seek anybody's permission. I don't need to seek anybody's permission. It's too late in life to start seeking permission now.
Well, I think it requires a review. The way it has been written, it will inhibit a lot of people, so this requires a review definitely.
It requires
That's my feeling.
It requires a review. In other words, it's too broad at the moment and it will stop well-intentioned people.
Yes, it is overarching in a manner that inhibits people from writing about important historical events.
Hello and welcome to a special set of interviews for The Wire. Recent amendments to the Central Civil Service rules means that any retired government officer who worked for an organization connected to security or intelligence cannot now write a book, a newspaper article, or give a television interview on a subject connected to the domain of his organization or based upon expertise and knowledge gained by virtue of working for that organization without prior government clearance. Is that understandable, or is it an attempt to silence people who could be critics of the government? My first guest to answer that question is the former head of RNAW, A.S. Dulat. Mr. Dulat, incidentally, is someone who would be personally affected by this amendment. Mr. Dulat, the amendment says that any retired government officer who worked for a security or intelligence-related outfit cannot any longer write a book, give an interview to television or a newspaper article on a subject connected to the domain of his previous organization or based upon expertise and knowledge gained by virtue of working for that organization without prior government clearance. How do you, as a former head of RNAW, respond to this amendment?
You see, first and foremost, having spent close to 40 years in government, let me say that when government decides something, the government, I would say, is right, because I don't think it's easy to challenge the government. So if the government says that we should all stop writing, well, so be it. But in this particular case, the rule as it is now stated, there are a lot of gray areas. This business of domain. For somebody like me it's 20 years since I left the organization. Now, what is it that could trouble the government now about whatever little I might have learned 20 years ago? Because I've learned much more since then. And then the question arises about publishing and writing. Okay, if I can't write fact, can I write fiction? Can I write history? Can I write poetry? There are so many gray areas here. And is it that let's take Kashmir, for instance. I'm one of the very few who writes on Kashmir. And I have never written, to my way of thinking or to my mind, anything which is offensive to the government or anti-government. When things were going wrong in Kashmir after the abrogation of Article 370, there were people who had served in bigger positions than mine who said that the valley is lost. And I argued against that. I said the value will never be lost. the Kashmiri will never be lost to India.
Can I come in at this point and put this to you? Let me take you as an example, because you're a former head of RAW. You've written books on Kashmir. You've given interviews and written articles on Kashmir and also Pakistan. Now, this means as a former head of RAW, you cannot do this anymore. Do you see that as an attempt to censor you? Do you see it as an attempt to enforce silence upon you?
You see, I look at it like this. If it is applied uniformly to everybody, then I guess it's fair enough, because maybe government is not interested in our views. My own personal thing is I've always felt that too few of us write. There are not many intelligence officers who write. I can't think of another one who writes, for instance, on Kashmir. And I have never criticized the government. I have never criticized the Prime Minister. And I would be the last one to criticize my own organization.
Let me put it like this. You began
yes.
in your first answer by saying that whatever the government decides is right, it's not easy to challenge it. You said if the government stops people like you writing, so be it. So your first answer was clearly a sign that you were willing and ready to accept the amendment. You're not going to challenge it. You don't disagree with it. You think the government is right. But then you said in your second answer, it all depends upon whether it's applied uniformly. Many people fear that people who the government thinks could be critics will not be given permission. They will therefore be effectively silenced, but others who are supporters of the government will get that permission readily. How do you respond to that fear?
Well, if that happens, then again, I would say, so be it. I mean, if my writings are offensive and somebody else's are not, well, I'll take it. I'll say, okay, good. Fine.
You keep repeating this phrase, so be it. Are you really, and I'm asking this a second time, are you really ready to accept that you've been silenced? You can't give interviews, you can't write articles, you can't write books without permission. Are you ready to accept that?
Mr. Thapar, what is my option now? As I see it, I'm not one of those guys who's going to go to court. I'm not one of those guys who's going to start, asking for permissions. Let me give you an example. For instance, there is one of our very senior officers, Mr. M.K. Narayanan, who's held various positions in government. He writes regularly. And of late, he's been a little more critical than he used to be. Now, does the government expect him to take permission from the DIB?
Absolutely. He's a former head of the IB. That is an intelligence and security related outfit. He's writing articles for the Hindu. He would have to get clearance or he would be in breach of the rules and liable for punishment, which would presumably be stopping his pension.
I don't visualize Mr. Narayanan now at this age in his life seeking permission. And I don't think he's going to stop writing either.
In other words, the government will discriminate in terms of how it responds to people who breach the rules. Some people who may not be as eminent as Mr. Narayanan will be punished, their pension can be docked. Others who are eminent will get away with it. That's not fair, is it?
No, that's why I said there are gray areas here. It's not very clear. But if the government has decided to do something, I would again say, so be it.
Well, let me just point out this gray area is not a gray area because the law is imprecise or indistinct. The grayness, if I can so put it, emerges out of the government's willingness to enforce the law. In some cases, like Mr. Narayanan, who's so eminent, it won't be enforced. In other cases where the person is not that eminent, it will be. So the grayness is not inherent in the rule or the law, it's inherent in the government's willingness to enforce it. That makes the grayness arbitrary it makes it a matter of government discretion. Some people will be favored because the law won't be enforced, others will be targeted because the law will be enforced.
Well, the government can always use its discretion. You can call it arbitrary or whatever it is. It is up to government to use its discretion. You know, a lot of us who, since we've retired, have been asked from time to time to help government, and it has happened. But at the same time, like most of the West, we do not have what is called an establishment. You know, the general thing is that when you're in, you're in. When you're out, you're out. So in the United States, for instance, you know, there is institutional memory is a huge thing, and people are not forgotten. Here in India, it's a little different. So I think that whole advantage of an establishment, if I may call it that, is lost here. And I come back to the same thing.
Can I put this to you? When
Yes.
an officer like yourself, who was head of RNAW, or someone else like Mr. Narayanan, who was head of the Intelligence Bureau, is required to get advance permission for a book, a newspaper article, or a television interview, is it not questioning the person's judgment and discretion? Doesn't it amount to the government saying to someone who was at the very top of the profession, we don't trust your judgment, we don't trust what you're going to say, we need to clear it?
See, when you say top of the profession, that was a long time ago. And there have been people, or there would be people who would say this guy didn't deserve to be at the top of.
But that's another matter. I'm interrupting because I'm not questioning whether you were correctly put at the top of your profession or not. That's a different issue. I'm questioning whether, in requiring a former head of RAW to get clearance before he speaks out, the rule questions his judgment and discretion. Answer that for me.
Yeah, I think it's a bit sad, but the government is always has the final say. I think I started by saying I think that too few of us who write. There should be many, many more writing. But if this is also found offensive, then I mean, what can one say? I can only say it's sad, but the government is right.
Let me put this to you. It's not just sad. Your books on Kashmir have opened the eyes of the Indian people to the history of a region you understand intimately. You've acquainted audiences with the history, the politics, the personalities in a way in which newspaper articles cannot. You've done the same in your articles and interviews about Pakistan. Now, if such books and articles cannot be written, won't that insight be denied to the Indian people? Won't the people and the country be the losers?
Well, I don't know how much I know Kashmir or I don't know Kashmir. I'm not reserving any bragging rights. That's for government, again, to decide whether, you know, whatever I know is of any consequence or not. After all, yeah, I do feel that having watched Kashmir or looked at Kashmir or known Kashmiris for 33 years, in my own way of thinking, I think it's an asset. It's a national asset. It's an asset for the government. But if the government thinks that my thinking or my knowledge or my knowing Kashmiris for 33 years is rubbish, then I can't challenge that.
So your position, and I'm repeating it because I think it's important the audience should understand, is you believe if the government has done this, the government is right. You actually believe that if the government has done this, it's right to do it. You did say it's a bit sad, but that's a very mild term. The final position is that the government is right.
I still say that it is sad, it's very sad, but I am in no position to challenge or whatever the government has decided. And I've been long enough in government to know that you cannot challenge the government.
Leave challenging aside. Has the government done the right thing or the wrong thing?
Now, as I said, it's sad. Yeah.
You're not going to go stronger than that. You won't go stronger than sad.
But if you want me to say whether it's right or wrong, I'd say it's not right.
It's sad and it's not right.
Not right, yes.
One last question. Your books, I've read, and many people have valued them. When you've written in newspapers, people have enjoyed it and learnt. When you've spoken on television, you've informed people. Will you continue to write and therefore ignore this rule because it's in the greater national interest and it doesn't threaten revealing secrets? Or will you now silence yourself? Or will you seek permission first? Which of the three?
I'm not going to seek anybody's permission. I don't need to seek anybody's permission. It's too late in life to start seeking permission now. And to answer your question, I've got to think about this. But the first thing which struck me yesterday, because writing has become, it keeps my mind ticking, and I do like to write. I keep doing jottings, I may not write a book, but I'm always jotting, however disorganized I might be. And the two thoughts that came to my mind yesterday, now I don't know whether that amounts to defying these rules, is what if I were to write history? What if I were to write fiction?
That's a very neatly put answer. But the important thing is, and I'm quoting you, I won't seek permission. It's too late in life for that. I don't need to do so. You're leaving open the question whether, therefore, you will defy the rule or whether you think about it carefully and perhaps sidestep it by writing fiction or poetry. But this is an issue you're going to think about carefully. What you ruled out is seeking permission.
Seeking permission and also challenging the government.
You will not challenge the rule, you will not seek permission, but it is still possible that you will continue to write. That is still possible.
It's possible.
So A.S. Dulat will not be silenced by a rule change.
No, I didn't say that.
No, you didn't say that, but that is crystal clear. I thank you, Mr. Dulat, for joining me, and I hope you don't get into trouble because you gave an interview on a subject that perhaps the government would have preferred you to keep quiet about without seeking their permission first. Thank you very much indeed. Take care.
Thank you, Mr. Thapar. Thank you.
And now, my next guest for this special set of interviews is former Army Chief General VP Malik. He is a person who, as a member of the Army, is not as yet covered by these amendments, but who knows when the amendments will be extended to cover the Army as well. Join me in a moment's time to hear what General Malik has to say about these amendments. Welcome back. I'm now joined by the former Chief of the Army Staff, General Ved Prakash Malik, the hero of the Kargil War. General Malik, a recent amendment to the Central Civil Service Pension Rule says that any retired officer who worked for a security or intelligence-related outfit cannot give, without prior government permission, an interview to a newspaper, to a television channel, or write a book on any subject connected to the domain of that organization or based upon any expertise and knowledge that he gained by virtue of working for that organization. As a former Army chief, how do you respond to this amendment?
Karan, firstly, I must mention that the armed forces are not included in this. So my comments are not from the armed forces because those have been excluded in the gazette that has been issued. But I am looking at it from history angle, as a historian. And the fact is that if we are to take permission, I mean, anybody who's writing something about the past incidents, even important events like the Naxalite movement or what happened in 1984 or what happened on the border. I'm talking about the BSF officers or ITBP officers, these people. And if they have to take permission from the government, people will be inhibited. Firstly, knowing how the government functions, you will find either the permission will not come or it will take a very long time and it will frustrate the writers. My other contention is that unfortunately the Official Secret Act, which must be followed, I believe in that, but it is not, the documents with the government are not declassified for a very long time. It doesn't happen in India as frequently as it should, unlike it happens in USA or UK. So there will be a problem. You will not get to know different angles of the incident, the event. So as a historian, you will not be able to write well. And the other thing is that people will lose out not knowing what the history was. I do believe that, whatever has been written, there can be lessons, whatever gone wrong, what has gone wrong, right? So those lessons will be missing as far as the future generation is concerned. I want to hear Karan quote what George Kennan said, if you permit. I will just quote him on that, what I had in my mind. And quoting him, he said, without a generation of civilized people to study history, to preserve its records, to absorb its lessons and relate them in its own problems, history would lose its meaning, unquote.
Can I pick up on that? If people who have experience of things like the Naxal struggle, that was the example you took, are unable to write about it from the basis of what they know, history will lose out, the understanding of the Indian people will suffer. Doesn't this mean that the nation as a whole will lose out? The insight we get from such writings won't be available to us.
Yeah, you're right. I also believe that at strategic level, one requires a long memory and longer foresight and vision. When memory is missing, then what happens is you have floundering knee-jerk reactions within the government or with any establishment, and ad hoc decision making takes place. That is not required. So from the historical point of view, I believe that in order to learn these lessons, it is necessary for people who have got this experience to be able to write what they have read, what they have seen, and what they have analyzed.
If it's necessary for people who have this experience to be able to write what they've seen and done, then let me ask you, did the government do the right thing by making this amendment, or has the government made a mistake?
Well, I think it requires a review. The way it has been written, it will inhibit a lot of people, so this requires a review, definitely.
It requires
That's my feeling.
It requires a review. In other words, it's too broad at the moment and it will stop well-intentioned people.
Yes, it is overarching in a manner that it inhibit people from writing about important historical events.
Can I go one step further and ask you this? Do you think this is an attempt to silence people who the government fears would be critical?
Well, I won't like to comment on that. I don't know it. But as I said, that the rule that the way it has been put across now, it is an inhibiting factor for the writers, authors.
Let me put it like this. The rule affects people who worked in the Intelligence Bureau, people who worked in RNAW. Does this rule not suggest that the government cannot rely upon their judgment and discretion? That the government is worried, doesn't trust what they'll say, and therefore needs to clear it first? Isn't that the implication of the rule?
Karan, firstly, I must tell you that I do believe in Official Secret Act, and I think it should be followed. And the if people have gone wrong or if they go wrong in not following it properly, then they can be hauled up. You can haul up anybody. And because that would be a violation of the Official Secret Act. But again, I'm repeating that the material which is classified at a certain stage, it must be declassified so that we can make use of the history.
What about my point? When you say to someone who was head of RAW or head of IB, let's take the example of Mr. Narayanan, who writes regularly in the Hindu. He was head of IB. He went on to become National Security Advisor. Now, when you say to someone like him, every article must be clear, is it not tantamount to saying, we don't trust your judgment and discretion? We want to know what you are going to say so we can clear it before you say it.
He's a very experienced man. As long as he is not violating the Official Secret Act, whatever he writes, I think would be very beneficial for people to read.
So asking him to prior clear his articles is the wrong thing to do.
I feel that it is not required, particularly of certain, I mean, I wrote certain anecdotes or incidents in one of my books, for example, and they were about 10 or 12 years ago old. So I thought that there will be lessons to be drawn from that. I wrote it particularly, and similarly, Mr. Narayanan, he's got a lot of experience earlier, both as IB head as well as governor later on. And as long as he is not violating the Official Secret Act, I think it will be beneficial to read.
That's a very important point you're making. The Official Secret Act already exists, and anyone who violates it will be punished. Well, given the fact this act exists, why do we need this amendment to the pension rules? The Official Secret Act should be sufficient.
I agree with you. I agree with you. As I said, as far as the Official Secret Act is concerned, it should be followed strictly. And secondly, I must again repeat that documents must be declassified. Incidents must be declassified after a certain period.
So you're also saying that this amendment to the rules was unnecessary because there's already an Official Secrets Act to prevent things being disclosed which the government thinks should not be. You don't need these amendments.
That's right. You know, and taking it too far as to stopping the pension, etc., is not desirable.
In fact, is it right to punish people by docking their pension? Surely that is hitting at their economic well-being and denying them the legitimate, well-earned fruits of an entire career. So is it right to target their pension?
No, as I said, trying to stop pension is not the right thing. If anybody has violated the Official Secret Act, he can be hauled up. You can take him to the court. You can whatever, you can charge sheet him because that is an official violation of this Official Secret Act. But putting it across that we will stop your pension, etc., is not a desirable thing.
My last question, General Malik. This amendment at the moment covers 18 organizations, including the Intelligence Bureau and RNAW. It does not include the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. However, you know and I know that several retired officers, particularly from the Army, are fairly frequent on television. They're fairly frequent in newspapers. They write critically, they write analytically, they write insightfully. Are you worried that in due course, this amendment will be extended to cover them as well?
Look, military history is an important subject for everyone who was born, who is wearing uniform or who has to wear uniform, even outside. Military history is a very important subject. And most of us are encouraged to read as soon as we go to NDA, IMA, or when we are young officers. And as long as we are not violating Official Secret Act, then it should be all right for a retired person to write about it. As far as serving people are concerned, as it is, there is a very strict rule that they cannot write anything in public domain without taking permission from their superiors.
Yes, we're leaving serving officers out. This doesn't concern them. But are you
That's fine,
worried?
yeah.
Are you worried that this could apply to the army in 2 years, 3 years, or maybe earlier? Are you worried it could be extended?
Yeah, one is worried because, at the moment it is not. I hope it will never be.
I hope so too. I thank you, General Malik, for speaking to me. And in particular, I thank you for pointing out that this requires a review. It's overarching. You also believe that the Official Secrets Act is already there to ensure that what the government doesn't want made public is not made public. Therefore, there was no need to bring this amendment. And certainly, it wasn't desirable to target people's pensions, which is something that has been legitimately and rightly earned as a result of an entire career. Thank you very much for speaking to me, General Malik. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you, Karan. Thank you.